Good morning, good evening, and good night, depending on where you're joining us from across the globe. I appreciate you coming and speaking with us today to learn more about the do's and don'ts for your international U.S. interview. I'm joined by Kelsey, our senior recruiter, one of the best in the game. We're going to talk a little bit more about how to prepare for your interviews, what to do and what not to do. So feel free to throw questions in the chat as we move along.
And also, if you wouldn't mind, just drop us a note to let us know where you're listening in from. We would love to see.
All right. And again, as I mentioned, I'm the director of recruiting here at Worldwide Health Staff, located in Charlotte, North Carolina. Been with the organization for about 5 months, so still learning, but I've got my expert here beside me that can help with more of the detailed questions as they come up. All right, and just a quick overview of the agenda for today. We're going to talk about the importance of preparation for your interview, some of the do's, what you should be doing as you're in the interview, the don'ts, what to avoid in your interview. Then we'll open it up at the end for any questions you might have for us.
All right, so preparation is the key to a successful interview. Nurses that spend time preparing for their interview overall have a better chance of attending the interview and have a better chance of getting an offer from their interview. There are lots of different ways that you can prepare for an interview, but if this is your first time interviewing with a US-based employer, these are some of the things that we would recommend. First, do a little bit of research about the US healthcare system, how hospitals work here, the roles that nurses play on their teams. If you have questions about this, you can always ask your recruiter. One of the biggest things that I cannot recommend enough is researching your employer. I've seen so many people go into interviews and they show the interviewer that they've done research about their hospital. They're able to say, I want to work here because your mission and values align with my mission and values. And the interviewers are so impressed that they did research about the hospital. You can find information about the hospital on their hospital website. You can look up Facebook groups of nurses that live in that area or nursing associations in that area. You can also check out a bunch of different webinars that we have on YouTube. We've done webinars with different employers all across the US. So there's lots of tools to be able to research your employer ahead of time. It's also really important to practice common interview questions. We'll discuss a few of them here today, but your recruiter actually has a resource of a bunch of common interview questions that they would be happy to share with you so that you can get an idea of what types of questions are asked in the interview. Questions about your experience are common and about your clinical skills. Also, why you want to be a nurse and why are you passionate about nursing? These are all things that you should be prepared to talk about in your interview. And the final thing that we would recommend is preparing your documents, especially your resume. A good resume goes a long way in an interview. And if you're not sure that your resume is up to the standard that it should be, or you want to add something or take something off, ask your recruiter to send you our resume template. We have a great resume template that we would love to share with you. That you can get from your recruiter. It tells you things you should add, like your NCLEX license information. It tells you things you should take off, maybe like your date of birth or your parents' information or your religion. Those are things you can remove from your resume. So we'd be happy to give you some advice on what to add to your resume. Now, there are lots of other ways to prepare for your interview, and we'll talk about a few more of those down the line, but these are some of the most important ones.
All right, so I would jump into some of the do's, what to do when you're in your interview. So as Kelsey mentioned, it is key, it's vital to make sure you research and prep for your interview before you attend it. Just coming into the interview organized and prepared is going to make a great first impression on the interviewer. So definitely recommend it. Again, we have tons of resources that we can provide from our recruiters. We have a recruitment operations team that gathers a lot of these details for us that they can share with you. Of course, with technology, you can research online as well. So look up as much as you can, learn as much as you can about the employer so that you really are prepared for when you arrive to that interview. Next suggestion here is dress professionally for a virtual interview. So of course, from the waist up, you want to look great. I do recommend looking great across the board. Just to throw a little humor in here, I was watching a YouTube video of an individual that had to jump up because his kid ran into the room and he had gym shorts on. So you just never know what's going to happen. So just make sure you're professional across the board. You're in a quiet setting, nice background that's not distracting. We were just kind of joking about the background we have here today and how it makes it look like I have hair when I really don't. So just be aware of your surroundings. Make sure you have a good quiet background as you're going into that interview as well. One area of note, scrubs are okay if you're at work. So don't be worried about having to rush from going from work to a private room and changing. We understand it's a professional environment. We might be at work. The interviewers are aware of that and okay with it. So no big issue. And when we talk about dressing professionally, that could be a polo, a collared shirt, a tie, a blazer. Just try to look nice, neat, be groomed, spend a lot of time like I did fixing my hair for the call today. So you just know that you present well when you actually attend the interview. Next topic is be punctual. So we do recommend trying to get there 30 minutes before your interview, just so you can make sure your internet's working, you're logged in, you're not rushed, so you have your thoughts gathered and are ready to really jump into that interview and be successful as you go forward. Next is communicate clearly, ask clarifying questions, and provide detailed answers. Of course, this is a big piece of the interview. Just how you present yourself to the interviewer is going to help with the decision they make with extending you an offer. So that's why it's key to practice before you jump into that interview, because it's going to help you get as many offers to get you to where you want to be. One of my favorites is show enthusiasm and smile. Just being yourself, bringing your personality is going to present well to the interviewer. It's going to make sure they know you're a good culture fit. It's going to add to their team culture. So I do recommend smiling and just kind of enjoying the experience as you move forward. Next topic, talk about why you are a good fit for this unit that you're interviewing for. So part of the interview is selling yourself. So know what you're good at, make sure you hit on those points, and sell yourself to those interviewers as you go through the process. Lastly, schedule an interview prep call with your recruiter and request resources. Again, we do this all day, every day. We've gathered a lot of these resources ourselves. We've done our research like we were going to prepare for an interview. So we have a lot of the things you might have questions about that we're happy to share with you. We're happy to do mock interviews, really talk through what we're doing today in this webinar in more detail. So don't be afraid to use us as a resource as you move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brian. Now we're going to discuss some of the things you shouldn't do when it comes to preparing for your interview or in your interview. So one of the things that can be a real issue is if your interviewer is talking and you interrupt them, or you try to start answering their question before they even finish asking it. It's important to respect the interviewer, just like they're respecting you and your time and your chance to interview. So make sure that you allow them to finish talking completely before you start answering their question or asking questions. What we recommend is that you don't turn off your camera. Sometimes you might struggle to understand the interviewer, or the interviewer might struggle to understand you just because you're from different places around the world. And one of the things that can help with this is having your camera turned on. That way they can see your mouth and see your lips moving and have an easier time understanding you. Now, if there's a connection issue, your interview facilitator might advise you to turn off your camera, and that's okay. But for as much as you can, keep your camera on so that they can see you. Like Brian mentioned, this is your chance to give a good first impression, and it's hard to do that if your camera is not turned on. One of the biggest things we need you to avoid when interviewing for your own success is reading answers off of a sheet of paper or another screen, or having somebody else help you with your answers. Interviewers are looking for people that can communicate well, communicate effectively. And if you're reading your answers off of a piece of paper, that is going to show them that you can't communicate effectively. Now, you might have written down your answers just because you're nervous or you're not sure what to say, but this is where you should practice ahead of time, so that you can not memorize, but practice your answers in advance. It's okay to take a couple notes with you in your interview. Just jot down a couple of things to remember, but don't write out your full answers ahead of time. Now, usually you'll have a chance to ask some questions in the interview, and it's good to ask about the orientation process, the nurse-to-patient ratio, what it's like to live in that area. But here are some of the things you should avoid asking about in your interview. The first is salary questions. It's just not appropriate to ask salary questions in a US interview. Now, if you have questions about salary, you can ask your recruiter and they'll give you the best advice they can. But for most of our employers, the salary is not even calculated until after your interview. So that is not a question that we can answer up front, and it's not a question that your interviewer would be able to answer. You should not ask questions about transferring to a different unit or a different hospital. This interview is for the unit that you're interviewing for and the hospital that you're interviewing for. So if you go into your interview and you say, well, I really don't want to work in this area, I want to work in this state instead, or can I transfer to one of your different hospitals? They're not going to extend you an offer because they're looking for nurses to fill that particular opening at their hospital. And finally, I recommend against asking questions about the immigration process. These are important questions to ask, but your interviewer is probably somebody that works on the floor at the hospital, and they're not very informed about the immigration process just because that's not what they do every day. But you know who does it every day is our team here. So if you have questions about the immigration process, please ask your recruiter, drop questions in the chat here. We'd be happy to answer questions that you have about the immigration process.
Yeah. I just want to add one quick note about transferring to new units. From my experience working with some of these hospital systems, a lot of times they're going to have a policy in place where you can't transfer 6 months to a year, depending on each company's policy. So that's something you wouldn't be able to do right away anyway. So again, just get settled in, make sure this is where you want to be, and think about that transfer down the line once you establish yourself with that organization.
Absolutely. And I get that question a lot from nurses that say, well, you know, Kelsey, can I transfer to a different unit after I've been working there for a little while? And that's not something that we know at this time. As you're probably aware, if you're joining us, we're a direct hire opportunity for most of our openings. And so your contract is between you and your employer. So any changes to your unit assignment or anything like that will be between you and your employer once you've started to work there. Now, one thing that it's good to avoid is don't talk about wanting to work in a different unit from the one you're interviewing for. Now, most of the time, you're only going to interview for the type of unit that you're currently working in. But sometimes, let's say maybe you have less experience in one area. Let's say you've been working in med-surg for about 6 months, and we're helping you get lined up for an interview with one of our great long-term care employers. It's really important to not go in the interview and say, you know, I really don't want to work in long-term care. I really want to work in a hospital in a med-surg setting. If that's where you want to work, then you should not interview with employers that aren't what you're looking for. And you also should not in your interview talk about wanting to work in different areas. So make sure to sell yourself for the opportunity that you're interviewing for. And finally, don't forget to ask questions. Nurses that ask questions in their interview do so much better than those that don't. I've seen lots of feedback from interviewers that said, oh yeah, this nurse came in really prepared. They had a whole list of questions that they wanted to ask, and that really made me see that they're ready for this opportunity. They're interested in this opportunity. We want to make them an offer. So those are just a few of our things you should avoid. Of course, your recruiter has lots of advice for you. Like Brian mentioned, our recruiters do offer one-on-one training and assistance for your interview, so you can always get more resources from them as well. Next up, we're going to talk about a few of the common interview questions that you should prepare for. There's lots of different questions that can be asked in an interview, but these are some of the ones that we see most frequently. The first one, this is the first question they're always going to ask in an interview. At almost every interview that I've seen, this is the first question they start with, and they say, tell me about yourself, or they say, tell me about yourself and your nursing experience. Now, sometimes when you hear this question, you might think, well, let me tell them about my family or my hobbies or what I like to do in my free time. And these are okay things to talk about, but what they really want to know about is your nursing experience. So what I recommend is talking about 3 things. 1, the types of units that you've worked in, both past and present. 2, the types of patients that you've handled or the types of cases that you've handled, especially in your current unit. And 3, the type of equipment that you've worked with. So if you have experience with telemetry machines, EKG machines, or even if you use electronic or paper charting, those are great things to talk about with this type of question. Try to keep your response to about 2 minutes. You don't want to take too much of the interviewer's time. But again, this is your opportunity to sell yourself, sell your skills. So it's okay to brag about yourself a little bit, talk about your experience. If you've been recognized in your unit for something special, you're a leader on your team, these are really great things to talk about when they ask that type of question. Now, another question that we see regularly is, why do you want to work at this hospital? Or even, why do you want to come to the US? And now, for a lot of you, coming to the US will mean major change for your family, opportunities for not just you, but maybe for your spouse or partner and your kids. And those are all good things to mention. But with this type of question in the interview, they really want to make sure that your goals as a nurse align with their goals as a hospital. So you can say things like, well, I really want to work for your hospital because I want to grow my career as a nurse, and I think your hospital is the best place for me to do that. Or, like we mentioned before, you can do some research about their hospital and you can say, well, I see that your hospital values this in their nurses, and I bring that to the team. And then you can also say, you know, coming to the US means a lot of opportunity and change for my family, and I want to give them that chance. And finally, one other thing that it's okay to talk about is say, well, I see that your hospital is located in this city, and I really want to live in this city because maybe you have family nearby or you've heard good things about it. That type of answer will show the interviewer that you're committed to their facility and to their region. So that's great to mention as well. One of the most frequently asked questions that we see in interviews is this question. Tell me about the most difficult situation you've had with a patient or a patient family member. What was the situation and how did you handle it? Now, this can feel like a lot. There's like 3 questions in there, right? But what they're looking for is for you to give a detailed example of how you handled a hard situation at work. So, for example, maybe you have a patient that is struggling to take their medication. They just want to go home. They're not listening to you, and maybe their family member's not helping as well. Talk through how you handle that situation step by step. Don't give a general answer, be detailed in your answer, and also talk about how you used your resources. How did you use your team or your training to really help you answer that question? Be as detailed as possible, especially in this type of question when talking about your experience. And finally, one question that's very common, if you Google like most frequently asked interview questions, you'll see this one time and time again. What are your strengths and weaknesses? Now, it's probably easy to talk about your strengths as a nurse, right? You've worked in that unit for, 10 years. You've worked on different teams. You've floated to different units. You have a bachelor's degree in nursing. You've passed the NCLEX exam, all of these great things. And you can talk about all of those. But a question that's sometimes hard to ask or answer is, what are your weaknesses? Because for most people, it's hard to say, well, I'm bad at this or I'm bad at this area. And one way that I recommend answering this question is say, I've really struggled in this area before. Maybe it's something like time management, or maybe it's something like, collaborating with your team members, but then talk about how you're working to improve that area. So instead of just saying, well, I have this weakness and I'm really struggling, talk about how you're going to work to get better. Talk about how you're going to improve your skills in that area. And then the interviewer will see that you have more strengths than you have weaknesses. So those are some of the common questions. There are lots more that can be asked in your interview. Your recruiter can give you a full list of all of those questions and help you practice. So, Brian, anything to add as far as those common questions?
Yeah, just a few points on some of your comments. So going into detail with your answers, what I would do is research behavioral interview questions. They'll really give you step-by-step on what they're looking for when they ask those type of questions. They'll even give you examples on how to answer. So just doing a little research on the behavioral interview question process would be a good resource for you. Then again, touching on the weakness, even though it might have been a weakness, you identified it. You can talk about the things you've done to improve that skill and how it might be a strength now. So one thing I've always told people, turn your weakness into a strength during the interview process, kind of spin it. So you're really giving them additional strengths than a true weakness.
Absolutely. Now we want to talk about a few more resources that we have, and you can find those on the Worldwide YouTube channel. We've done several other webinars. I'm actually in all 3 of these, I think. The first is applying and next steps to what to expect from your recruiter. So if you're just joining us or you haven't really started the process, you're not at the interview stage yet, check out this webinar to see what you can expect from the process and our team. The next is top 10 questions for worldwide recruiters. This actually features almost all of our recruiters on the recruiting team asking different questions and getting those answers. And then a couple of weeks ago, we did one of our Carrie's Corner events. Now, if you've been with us for a while, you know Carrie, you love her videos. I joined her a couple of weeks ago to talk about how to prepare your English skills for an interview. So go back and watch that one as well, especially if you feel like you're struggling with your English language before an interview. And then there's another one, I think from last year, where we talked about some of the best practices for your interview. We talk about some of the same things we talk about here, but also some other things as well. Now we'd like to open it up for some questions. So if you have questions about interviewing, please drop those in the chat now. I'm going to scroll through and see if we've got any questions from previous videos. I do see a few people asking about how you can get the recording for this. Check out our Facebook page or our YouTube page afterwards. Let's see, Brian, have you seen any questions in here?
It looks like Tracy, or our host, was answering most of them.
Perfect.
About being able to apply. So I think you're doing a great job of getting those answers to them, providing the link to our website.
Awesome.
So if you're not sure if you can apply or not, I would recommend just going through the process of doing so, and a recruiter will connect with you and talk through all the details to make sure you have the requirements we need to get you placed with a candidate or a client.
Absolutely. Right now for nursing roles, all of our nursing openings do require NCLEX because it is required to work as an RN in the US. We do have a huge interviewing event coming up at the end of this month that if you've passed your NCLEX, we would love to speak to you about. So apply right away so you can get connected with one of our recruiters. I would love to drop my email here. If you have questions or concerns, you haven't gotten in touch with someone yet, you can reach me at krobinson@healthstaff.org. Or if you want that resume template that I was talking about, drop me an email. I'll send that to you as well. I also see a couple of the nurses that I've been working with here in the chat. Thanks, guys, for joining. It's great to see you in there. I see someone from Nepal that's working in oncology. Absolutely, you can apply. We would love to see your application. If you haven't applied already, visit our website at healthstaff.org. If you have applied already and you're working with your recruiter, reach out to your recruiter about that interview event that's coming up at the end of the month. We have some openings that might be great for you.
And I did see a few pop up about nursing assistant roles. We're not currently recruiting for those positions, but we can definitely keep you in our database and our pipeline. So if things change, we can reach out to you. But right now, we do not have any opportunities.
Absolutely. One last thing, I don't see any other questions, but if you have an interview coming up with us in the next couple of weeks, we know it's a busy month for interviewing. Watch this video, take these tips, talk to your recruiter. We're really excited for you to have this interview opportunity, and we really wish you all the best in your upcoming interview. I see a couple more questions we can answer real quick. I see a question that says, how soon after the interview should I prepare my English test score? Great question. So we recommend doing your English exam once you've begun the immigration process. And that's because we have dedicated English exam support through Carrie Cooper. So we don't want you to go through that process on your own. We have support for you. Just make sure that you're interviewing for a state that accepts the exam that you want to take. So if you want to take PTE, make sure that you're interviewing for a state that accepts PTE. English exams are not dependent on the hospital that you're interviewing for, but they're dependent on the state. I recommend TOEFL all the time because it's accepted in all 50 states. IELTS is the next most accepted, but if you decide to take MET or OET or PTE, just double check with your recruiter that your state accepts that. Two more quick questions. Hi, Jan, I see you in the chat. Thanks for joining. It's great to see you. If we're hiring medical technologists, we are. You need to have a bachelor's degree in medical technology and your ASCPI certification. I also see a couple questions about if you don't have NCLEX, like Brian mentioned, you can get your application in, but we don't have openings right at this moment. One more question I'm going to answer today. Can someone show interest in more than one hospital? Great question. Right now, we only want to schedule you for one interview at a time. That way that you can focus on your primary interview. So I really, really recommend don't interview for a hospital that you're not interested in working at or for a city that you're not interested in living in. We want you to take your time to interview for the right hospital. So make sure that you're interviewing for a hospital that you really want.
And there was a question about what you should put in your resume. We do have that template that you mentioned earlier. So if you're not sure what you should include, please reach out to the recruiter. They can provide an example for you. But one thing that we've noticed in some resumes is people putting personal information in there. Please do not do that. In the States, that is not a common practice. A lot of times we'll go through and actually retract that from your resume or ask you to update it. But the best example would be just to get the template from the recruiter and go from there and ask questions as you update it.
And personal information would include things like your weight or your height or your date of birth or your parents' name or your religion. Those are personal details that you do not have to have in your resume. Now, things like your name, your email address, your country of origin, those are all things that you absolutely want to have. One last question before we go. Do you hire hospital experience less than 100 bed capacity? Absolutely, we do. We have openings all the time for smaller hospitals. That giant opening that I mentioned coming up at the end of June has lots of smaller hospitals that we would love to get you paired up with. So I think that's it for today.
Yeah.
Lots of great tips for you guys. Check us out on YouTube and Facebook. Reach out to your recruiter for resources, and we're so excited that you were able to join us today.
Yeah. And if we weren't able to get to your question, feel free to email us directly, and we'll make sure to follow up. We've just got so many coming in, and unfortunately, we can't get to all of them, but we're happy to give you more one-on-one time after the call.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your day.